A couple weeks ago, I made a video talking about dry yeasts and liquid yeasts and what you should normally do when you're activating those or starting those. And one of the most commonly asked questions was, what about Kveik? And that's a fair point. So today we're going to talk about Kveik specifically and what it does differently than normal yeasts and how you would treat it. Do you still need a starter? Do you overpitch? Do you underpitch? All those questions will be asked and answered in this video. Before I do that, though, real quick, I am not even close to the most educated person that I know on Kveik. So if you're watching this, either take exactly what I say as complete gospel or think I'm completely wrong and yell at me very, very loudly and egregiously in the comments. Let's jump right in. First and most commonly asked question with Kveik yeasts, dry or liquid, is do you need to do a starter with Kveik yeasts? And the answer to that is it kind of depends. For me, a lot of times when I'm using Kveik yeast, I don't do a starter and I brew really, really, really big batches of beer with very, very small pitches, i.e., a couple of these packs maybe for a 2-barrel batch. That comes with consequences, it comes with risks. When you're doing that, you're also kind of letting the Kveik take over in a random way and you are trusting that it's going to work out, but it is much less predictable if you don't make a starter. So you don't have to with most Kveiks, but there are exceptions to that as well. Now, before I jump into what those exceptions are, if you are underpitching purposely and not doing a starter, two things you need to have in your beer are a lot of nutrients and a lot of oxygen. You cannot get away with dramatically underpitching and just shaking and hoping for the best. If you don't have an oxygenation stone and you are doing a dramatic underpitch, maybe from a pure culture, it might behoove you to start your batch of beer off fermenting as like an open ferment style before transferring it into a closed vessel, just so there is that time for the Kveik to pick up some oxygen early on. Second most common asked question when it comes to Kveik yeasts is, how do you pronounce Kveik? How do you pronounce Kveik? As you can tell, I'm really good at talking, and so I would just go with exactly what I say, which is Kveik. However, I do hear people say Kveik. If you listen to the old Norse pronunciation, it's like Kveik, and it has some dialectual intricacies that people who speak my native American style of English. That came out weird. People from my mouth wordingness don't usually make those sounds, and so I've just kind of simplified it to Kveik. It's not quite Kveik, but it's as close as I can get. Now, what are the exceptions to when you should not dramatically underpitch? One of those exceptions is with some of the newer strains, such as Lutra, when you want a clean, consistent, controlled approach to the beer you're making. If you're going for that Lutra lager, then you kind of have two things that you should do. First of all, you should ferment that closer to room temperature. And by that I mean 68, 70 degrees, like the warmer end of what you would do with the normal any other yeast. And you should do a starter, and you should do all the things that I recommend in the liquid versus dry yeast video. That said, pretty much across the board with any Kveik you're doing, whether it's an isolate strain or a blend or a culture from wherever you got your culture from, one of those OG wooden rings, you should always ferment these hot. And if you don't, then a starter / a big pitch is kind of necessary. Really, the only time that you shouldn't ferment Kveik hot and fast is in the circumstances that you have a pure pitch that comes from one of the actual yeast companies, whether it be Lutra or Kveiking from Imperial or any of the Voss strains. And if you don't have those, you should definitely be fermenting warm. You need to roll your Kveiks through hot and fast. They need to go at 90 degrees with a ton of nutrients and just get the job done in the 2 to 5 days like they're supposed to. So that's, in general, how Kveik is different than regular yeast pitches. Harry, what other questions did you have specifically?
What is yeast?
What is yeast? I don't even know if Kveik is specifically like yeast or if it's not yeast. It's his own monster. Yeast is something that eats beer sugar and turns it into beer. And yeast is a broad category, actually. Saccharomyces is the yeast strain. Actually, Brettanomyces is a yeast strain, too. Yeasts are little fungal things. They're tiny funguses. This is my recap, by the way. Ferment these things hot. You can underpitch them in a lot of circumstances, but if you do so, make sure you add a butt ton of nutrients and preferably have a really good source of oxygenation in the early stages of fermentation. If you want a neutral beer, if you're going to ferment them cold, then you still should treat them like a normal yeast and do a starter and everything like that. Of course, this wouldn't really be applicable to blended stuff. So if you're using one of those little chips of Kveik blendiness that has all sorts of bacteria and whatever else in there. Starter is going to not make that the same thing by the time you add it to your beer. So don't do that. If you want me to dive deeper into specific questions, then leave those in the comments. I'm sure there's more that I could go into. I had Jimmy on a live stream a while ago, and he's done a ton of crazy amount of research on Kveik because that's his favorite yeast to use. And so I actually get a lot of ideas and research and stuff from him. So watch that live stream if you want to, sit for an hour and a half and learn more. Email me some Facebook messages on Instagram if you want to. I can answer questions. Check out our Pornhub account, pornhub.com/GeniusBrewing. And let me know what experiments I should do. Tell me now. Goodbye.